They thought the Black Maid belonged at the back door, but before the night was over, the most powerful man in the room would decide that if she was not welcome through the front entrance, neither was he. Naomi Carter paused beneath the glow of the Grand Hotel marquee, her fingers smoothing the sleeve of the perfectly pressed black uniform she had ironed before sunrise. Crystal chandeliers shimmered beyond the towering glass doors, casting warm ribbons of golden light across polished marble floors where the city's wealthiest donors gathered for the annual Hope Foundation Charity Gala. Luxury sedans lined the circular driveway while photographers called out the names of celebrities, business leaders, and philanthropists stepping onto the crimson carpet with effortless confidence. Naomi wasn't looking for attention. She never did. She carried a neatly organized clipboard against her chest, reviewing the final seating chart she had personally helped prepare after weeks of quiet work behind the scenes. Every centerpiece had been polished by her hands. Every linen had been measured twice. Every detail had been checked until long after the rest of the staff had gone home. Tonight was supposed to celebrate generosity, kindness, and dignity. She believed those words still meant something. She took one careful step toward the entrance before a white-gloved security supervisor extended an arm across her path without meeting her eyes. "Staff use the service entrance," he said flatly. Naomi blinked, certain he had mistaken her assignment. "I'm with the event team," she answered softly, holding up her credentials. "I was instructed to report through the main lobby." The man barely glanced at the badge hanging from her neck. "Back door," he repeated. "Those are the instructions." A couple waiting nearby turned toward the exchange. One woman in an elegant silver gown looked Naomi up and down before whispering something to the man beside her. They smiled politely, but not kindly. Another guest adjusted his tuxedo cufflinks and muttered just loudly enough to be heard. "Wouldn't look right with the photos anyway." The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Sometimes the quietest laughter reached the deepest. Naomi lowered her eyes for only a moment. She had spent 30 years learning that dignity often survived by remaining calm when the world expected anger. She thanked the guard with a voice that never shook and stepped away from the glowing entrance as another wave of distinguished guests walked effortlessly through the revolving doors without interruption. Around her, camera flashes sparkled like tiny bursts of lightning, while an orchestra inside rehearsed a gentle arrangement that drifted into the cool evening air. The music sounded beautiful from the sidewalk, yet somehow impossibly far away. She adjusted the strap of her work bag and followed the narrow pathway leading toward the loading dock behind the hotel, where delivery trucks, storage crates, and folding tables replaced polished marble and velvet ropes. Behind her, applause erupted as another famous guest arrived. Ahead of her, the metal service door waited beneath a single fluorescent light. Naomi inhaled slowly, refusing to let disappointment harden her heart. She had come to serve with excellence, not to seek recognition. But hidden behind the tinted windows overlooking the entrance, someone had witnessed everything without saying a single word. The service corridor carried a different kind of silence, one that every invisible worker eventually learned to recognize. It was the silence of people who made extraordinary evenings possible without ever becoming part of them. Naomi Carter walked past stacked catering supplies, neatly folded banquet chairs, and polished serving carts reflecting the cold fluorescent lights overhead. She greeted every kitchen employee by name because she believed respect should never depend on job titles. The dishwasher smiled back. The pastry chef wished her luck. A maintenance worker held the heavy door open for her with a quiet nod. They all knew Naomi. They also knew she was the first person to arrive every morning and usually the last one to leave at night. For nearly 11 months, she had worked inside the Castellano estate, where every detail mattered and every room demanded perfection. She never complained when unexpected guests arrived after midnight. She never cut corners while cleaning antique furniture worth more than the house where she had grown up. She memorized every preference without being asked twice, from the placement of fresh lilies in the library to the exact temperature requested for the morning coffee served in the private study. She believed excellence was a promise people made to themselves long before anyone else noticed. Most people never noticed at all. Her coworkers often wondered how she remained so calm. They did not know about the woman who had raised her with a simple lesson repeated almost every Sunday after church. Your character enters every room before your name does. Naomi carried those words with her like an invisible compass. She had faced rude customers before. She had been overlooked for promotions. She had watched strangers make assumptions before she had spoken a single sentence. None of those moments had convinced her to become bitter. She refused to surrender her peace simply because someone else had misplaced their kindness. As she reached the employee staging area behind the ballroom, several event coordinators hurried back and forth with headsets, clipboards, and schedules. One coordinator accepted the updated guest list from Naomi without looking up. Another asked whether the floral arrangements had been inspected for the third time. Naomi answered every question with quiet confidence because she already knew the answers. She had verified every table assignment before sunrise and personally corrected 3 printing errors that could have embarrassed the foundation during the evening presentation. No one asked who had fixed the mistakes. They simply continued preparing as though everything had always been perfect. Naomi preferred it that way. Recognition was pleasant, but reliability lasted longer. She carefully placed the final seating chart on the registration desk before stepping aside to allow another staff member to take credit during the last inspection. Her satisfaction came from seeing the event succeed, not from hearing applause that was never meant for people like her. Yet somewhere above the ballroom, inside a private lounge overlooking the arriving guests through tall windows of polished glass, Vincent Castellano stood quietly with his hands resting behind his back. The city expected him to make the opening remarks in less than 30 minutes. But instead of reviewing his speech, his attention remained fixed on the entrance below. He had recognized one familiar face walking away from the front doors toward the service corridor, and although his expression never changed, something about what he had witnessed refused to leave his thoughts. The ballroom slowly filled with voices that carried confidence as naturally as the crystal glasses balanced in manicured hands. Soft violin music drifted beneath the towering ceiling, while waiters moved with careful precision between tables decorated with white roses and glowing candles. Naomi Carter quietly checked every place, setting one final time before stepping back into the rhythm of the evening. She refilled water glasses before anyone noticed they were half empty. She adjusted chairs that had shifted only an inch. She caught small problems before they could become visible. The guests admired flawless service without realizing that perfection almost always belonged to someone whose name they would never learn. Near the center of the ballroom, a group of influential donors gathered beneath a towering floral arrangement while photographers captured smiling faces for tomorrow's newspapers. Naomi approached with a silver tray carrying sparkling water just as one of the organizers glanced toward her with visible annoyance. "Not here," the woman said, waving her away with a careless flick of her hand. "Use the side aisle. We cannot have staff walking through the middle while photographs are being taken." Naomi immediately changed direction without a single complaint. She understood that timing mattered during formal events. But as she moved toward the side of the room, another guest looked directly at her before quietly laughing to the couple beside him. "It is better this way," he murmured. "The pictures should focus on the donors, not the help." The remark was spoken softly, yet several people nearby heard it clearly enough to smile without correcting him. Naomi continued walking as though the words had dissolved before reaching her ears. Years had taught her that answering cruelty rarely transformed it into kindness. Moments later, she reached another table where a distinguished woman examined Naomi's polished uniform with obvious disapproval before removing her designer handbag from the empty chair beside her. "Please be careful," she said. "That bag costs more than most people make in a year." Naomi simply nodded. "Of course, ma'am." She carefully poured fresh water without allowing a single drop to touch the linen tablecloth. The woman barely acknowledged her professionalism. Instead, she resumed her conversation about generosity, compassion, and building a more inclusive community. The contrast settled heavily inside the room without anyone speaking its name. Across the ballroom, another volunteer accidentally dropped a stack of printed programs onto the polished floor. Before anyone reacted, Naomi quietly knelt to gather every page into perfect order. She handed them back with a warm smile that expected nothing in return. The young volunteer whispered a grateful thank you before hurrying away, but one executive watching nearby merely shrugged. "She is good at cleaning up," he remarked with an amused grin. "That is probably why she was hired." A few people chuckled politely before returning to conversations about charitable giving and social responsibility. Naomi stood again, smoothing the front of her uniform with steady hands. She reminded herself that another person's opinion could never define the value she carried within. Her mother had once told her that grace was easiest to admire and hardest to practice. Tonight those words felt heavier than ever. High above the ballroom, beyond the elegant balconies reserved for honored guests, Vincent Castellano remained motionless beside the glass overlooking the celebration below. He had listened to every careless remark through the discreet audio system connected to the event staff. His expression revealed nothing, but his blue eyes followed Naomi as she continued serving every guest with the same quiet dignity they had repeatedly failed to show her. The applause inside the ballroom grew louder as the master of ceremonies announced that the evening's principal benefactor had finally arrived. Yet Vincent did not move toward the stage. Instead, he slowly turned away from the spotlight, as though he had already decided that the most important moment of the night would happen somewhere else. The master of ceremonies welcomed the audience with polished enthusiasm, inviting every guest to celebrate an evening dedicated to compassion, opportunity, and respect. Crystal glasses rose in elegant toasts while applause echoed beneath the soaring ceiling. Yet Naomi Carter remained almost invisible at the edge of the ballroom, quietly replacing empty water pitchers before anyone noticed they needed refilling. The irony lingered in the air like perfume. Words about human dignity filled the stage, while simple dignity had quietly disappeared only a few yards away. Naomi never expected the speeches to change people. She only hoped they might remind them. She carried another silver tray toward the reception area when a senior event coordinator suddenly stepped into her path. His smile appeared pleasant, but his voice carried the unmistakable tone of someone more concerned with appearances than people. "We have media coming through this side in less than 2 minutes," he said. "Please wait behind the partition until they finish filming." Naomi looked toward the nearly empty hallway. "I only need to deliver these glasses to table 12, she answered gently. "It will take less than 30 seconds. The coordinator shook his head before she could finish. "Please cooperate. We need the background to look clean." Naomi glanced around the hallway. The marble floor reflected every chandelier above. The floral arrangements stood perfectly aligned. Nothing seemed out of place except herself. Without another word, she stepped behind the decorative partition beside several equipment cases, standing quietly while television crews and photographers crossed the lobby capturing images of smiling guests entering the ballroom. One cameraman passed within a few feet of her without realizing she was there. She was hidden in plain sight. A young hotel employee standing nearby looked embarrassed. "I am sorry," he whispered. "You did nothing wrong." Naomi offered him the same calm smile she gave everyone else. Sometimes people become so busy protecting an image that they stop seeing the people standing in front of them. The young man lowered his eyes, unable to answer. When the hallway finally cleared, Naomi resumed her work exactly where she had left it, never allowing frustration to slow her pace. Every glass reached its table. Every guest received the same respectful service regardless of whether they had shown her any in return. Across the ballroom, conversations flowed around million-dollar donations, prestigious partnerships, and heartfelt promises to build a kinder future. Few noticed the woman ensuring the evening never missed a single detail. Fewer still realized that the event itself had remained on schedule because she had quietly solved problem after problem long before the first guest arrived. High above the celebration, Vincent Castellano watched another monitor displaying the service corridors and preparation rooms. He had built successful businesses by noticing details others ignored. Tonight, the smallest detail had become impossible to overlook. He saw the coordinator directing Naomi behind the partition. He saw her waiting patiently instead of arguing. He saw her return to work with the same grace she had carried since arriving at the hotel. His expression remained composed, but his fingers slowly tightened behind his back before relaxing again. Beside him, one of his senior advisors cleared his throat. "Sir, everyone is waiting for your entrance. The board would like to begin the presentation." Vincent remained silent for another long moment, his eyes still fixed on the screen where Naomi disappeared once more into the rhythm of service. Finally, he asked a question so quietly that it almost sounded like he was speaking to himself. "Who decided she belonged out of sight?" The advisor hesitated, suddenly uncertain how to answer, because the room had just grown noticeably quieter, and everyone who knew Vincent Castellano understood that the calmest questions often carried the greatest weight. The applause inside the ballroom grew stronger as the orchestra finished its opening piece, and the master of ceremonies smiled toward the grand staircase, preparing to introduce the evening's most anticipated guest. Every camera slowly pivoted toward the entrance where Vincent Castellano was expected to appear. Board members straightened their jackets. Donors adjusted their ties. Volunteers quietly stepped aside to create a perfect path beneath the crystal chandeliers. Yet the staircase remained empty. The master of ceremonies glanced discreetly toward the event coordinator, who forced a reassuring smile while checking his watch. A few seconds passed, then another. The audience assumed the delay was intentional, part of a carefully planned entrance designed to build anticipation. Only a handful of people knew that Vincent had not moved from the private lounge. He stood silently beside the window, overlooking both the ballroom and the service corridors beyond it. His advisor remained nearby, waiting for instructions that never came. Finally, Vincent turned away from the glass. "Bring me the event director," he said calmly. Less than 2 minutes later, the director hurried into the lounge, breathing slightly faster than he wished to reveal. "Mr. Castellano, everyone is ready whenever you are." Vincent did not acknowledge the schedule. Instead, he asked a question that immediately erased the man's practiced smile. "Who instructed Naomi Carter to enter through the service entrance?" The director hesitated. "Sir, that is simply our standard procedure for support staff during high-profile events." Vincent held his gaze without raising his voice. "That was not my question." The room became remarkably still. The director swallowed before answering. "Security made the decision after consulting with operations. They believed it would keep guest traffic flowing smoothly." Vincent nodded once, neither approving nor criticizing. His silence unsettled everyone present far more than anger would have. After another moment, he asked, "Has anyone thanked her for helping organize this event?" The director looked genuinely confused. I am not certain." Vincent walked toward the door with measured steps, buttoning his dark jacket as though preparing for an ordinary meeting instead of the evening's headline appearance. "Then they have overlooked the wrong person." Without another word, he passed the waiting photographers stationed outside the lounge and ignored the grand staircase leading directly into the ballroom. His advisor instinctively followed, expecting him to take the familiar route toward the stage. Instead, Vincent continued past the elegant hallway, through a quiet employee corridor, and toward the rear loading area where delivery trucks had arrived only hours earlier. Kitchen employees stopped working for a moment as he walked by. Housekeepers exchanged uncertain glances. No one had ever seen him enter the event from this direction. Outside, the cool evening air carried the faint sounds of music drifting from inside the hotel. Beneath the pale glow of a single fluorescent light, Naomi stood alone beside a service cart, carefully folding fresh linen napkins before taking them inside for the dessert service. She had no idea that the most powerful guest at the gala had abandoned the spotlight completely. She simply focused on making certain every final detail reflected the same excellence she had brought to every task all year long. Vincent slowed to a stop several feet away and watched quietly as she finished folding the last napkin with steady, unhurried hands. For the first time that evening, the distance between power and humility had disappeared, and the next words spoken beneath that simple light would quietly change everything waiting beyond the ballroom doors. Naomi looked up as the footsteps approached, expecting another supervisor with another list of last-minute requests. Instead, she found Vincent Castellano standing a few feet away, his dark suit immaculate beneath the pale service light that seemed far too ordinary for a man whose arrival had kept an entire ballroom waiting. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The distant sound of applause drifted through the concrete hallway, reminding everyone inside that the evening's honored guest had still not appeared. Naomi immediately set the folded linens aside and straightened her uniform. "Good evening, sir," she said with quiet respect. "I apologize if I should already be inside." Vincent studied her expression. There was no resentment, no attempt to gain sympathy, only the same calm professionalism she had shown every day since joining his household staff. "Who asked you to come through this entrance?" he asked. Naomi hesitated for only a second. "Security directed me here," she answered honestly. They believed it was the appropriate entrance for staff. Vincent nodded once. And what did you believe? Naomi lowered her eyes briefly before meeting his gaze again. I believe the event was more important than my feelings. I did not want to create a problem on a night that was meant to help other people. Her answer lingered in the silence between them. Vincent had negotiated with powerful executives, politicians, and international investors throughout his life, yet few conversations had carried the quiet weight of those simple words. She had been treated as though she should remain unseen, yet her first concern had been protecting an evening dedicated to generosity. He glanced toward the ballroom doors hidden at the far end of the corridor. The orchestra had begun another piece while the audience continued waiting for him without understanding why. His advisor cautiously stepped closer. Sir, the board is asking if we should begin. Vincent never looked away from Naomi. Tell them to wait another minute. The advisor quietly disappeared. Naomi immediately shook her head. Please do not delay the program because of me. Everyone is expecting you. Vincent answered with the same calm tone he had maintained all evening. They have waited for less important reasons. Naomi looked uncertain. Sir, I am only here to do my job. A faint expression, almost too subtle to be called a smile, crossed Vincent's face. Exactly. He reached toward the service cart, lifted the neatly folded white gloves she had prepared for the dinner staff, and placed them gently back where they belonged. Every movement reflected deliberate respect rather than dramatic emotion. Then he extended his hand toward her. You have spent nearly a year making sure other people were welcomed with dignity, he said. Tonight you will not enter this building as someone hidden behind a service door. Naomi stared at the offered hand, surprised into silence. Around them, several kitchen employees had quietly stopped working. A hotel porter stood frozen beside a luggage cart. Even the security guard stationed near the loading dock seemed uncertain whether to look away or continue watching. Vincent spoke only one more sentence, his voice steady enough that everyone nearby heard every word. Walk beside me. Naomi slowly accepted his hand, not because she sought attention, but because refusing genuine respect would have diminished the very dignity she had worked so hard to preserve. Together, they turned away from the service entrance and began walking toward the front of the hotel, leaving behind a corridor where, for the first time that evening, every person present understood that true leadership was never measured by the distance someone stood above others, but by the willingness to stand beside them. The moment Vincent Castellano and Naomi Carter stepped into the grand lobby together, the rhythm of the evening quietly changed. Conversations faded one by one as guests noticed the man every camera had been waiting for was not walking alone. Instead of making his entrance surrounded by executives, board members, or celebrity donors, he matched his pace to the woman who had spent the entire evening making certain everyone else felt welcome. The revolving doors turned slowly behind them, allowing the warm glow of the chandeliers to spill across the polished marble floor. Camera flashes erupted almost instantly, but the usual excitement was replaced by visible confusion. Several photographers lowered their cameras for a moment, uncertain whether they were witnessing an unscripted interruption or the beginning of the evening's official program. Naomi instinctively tried to take a small step behind Vincent, hoping to return to the background where she believed she belonged. Without saying a word, Vincent slowed his pace until they were once again walking side by side. It was a simple gesture, almost invisible to anyone who was not paying attention, yet everyone noticed it. The board members waiting near the ballroom entrance exchanged uneasy glances. The event director who had insisted on flawless appearances suddenly found himself unable to explain what was unfolding. Even the security supervisor who had redirected Naomi earlier stood frozen beside the front doors, his confident posture replaced by silent uncertainty. As Vincent and Naomi entered the ballroom together, the orchestra gradually stopped playing in the middle of a measure. One violin continued for another second before falling silent as well. Hundreds of guests turned toward the entrance. The applause that had been prepared for Vincent never arrived. Instead, an unfamiliar stillness settled over the room. The woman who had warned Naomi not to appear near the photographers stared in disbelief. The executive who had joked that she belonged cleaning up after others quietly lowered his eyes toward the table in front of him. The distinguished guest who had worried about expensive handbags suddenly seemed far more interested in the untouched glass of water resting beside her dinner plate. No one laughed now. No one whispered. Vincent continued walking at the same calm, deliberate pace until he reached the center aisle leading directly toward the stage. Every person in the ballroom instinctively stepped aside, creating space not because anyone had ordered them to, but because something larger than protocol had entered the room. Naomi felt dozens of eyes following her every step. She had never wanted attention, and she certainly had never imagined becoming the focus of an evening attended by the city's most influential people. Yet she refused to lower her head. She remembered the lesson her mother had repeated throughout her childhood. Dignity was never something another person could hand to you. It was something you chose to carry, especially when others failed to recognize it. Vincent glanced briefly toward Naomi before looking across the silent audience. His expression remained composed, revealing neither anger nor satisfaction. He had not come to embarrass anyone. He had come to correct something that should never have happened. Under the brilliant crystal lights, with every conversation suspended and every camera focused on the same unexpected scene, the grand ballroom discovered that the most unforgettable entrance of the evening had not been created by wealth, influence, or prestige. It had been created by a single decision to place human dignity ahead of appearances, and in that profound silence, everyone understood that the night they had carefully planned was no longer the night they were going to remember. Vincent Castellano stopped only a few feet from the stage, but instead of climbing the polished steps prepared for him, he slowly turned to face the audience. Naomi Carter remained beside him, still holding the quiet composure that had carried her through every uncomfortable moment of the evening. Around them, hundreds of guests waited in complete silence. The master of ceremonies lowered his microphone. The orchestra remained motionless. Even the photographers seemed to forget to press their cameras as they sensed that whatever happened next would be remembered far longer than any carefully rehearsed speech. Vincent allowed the silence to settle before speaking in the same calm voice that had commanded boardrooms for years. "Tonight we gathered to celebrate generosity," he began. "We spoke about compassion, opportunity, and human dignity." His eyes slowly moved across the room, never accusing, never raising his voice. Yet before this event even began, one of the people who worked hardest to make this evening possible was quietly told that she did not belong at the front entrance. No one interrupted. No one looked comfortable. The event director lowered his head. The security supervisor stood perfectly still near the ballroom doors. Vincent continued, "Naomi Carter has served my household with integrity, professionalism, and respect every single day. She has earned the trust of everyone who truly knows her character. If someone with that kind of character is considered unworthy of entering through the front door, then this event has misunderstood the very purpose of charity." The words were neither dramatic nor cruel. They carried only the unmistakable weight of truth. Vincent glanced toward the chairman of the foundation before speaking again. A charitable organization is not measured by the size of its donations. It is measured by the dignity it extends to every person, especially those who expect nothing in return. The chairman slowly stepped forward, his expression filled with genuine regret. He looked directly at Naomi. "Miss Carter," he said carefully, "on behalf of our foundation, I sincerely apologize. What happened this evening does not reflect the values we claim to represent, and the responsibility is ours." Several board members quietly nodded in agreement. One by one, other guests lowered their eyes, remembering words they wished they had never spoken and assumptions they wished they had never made. Naomi listened without triumph. She had never hoped for public recognition or public apologies. She simply answered with quiet grace, "Thank you. I accept your apology. I only hope that the next person who comes through those doors will never have to wonder whether they belong." Her gentle response settled over the ballroom with greater power than any accusation could have carried. Vincent gave a small nod of respect before turning once more toward the audience. "Then let tonight become the beginning of that change." For the first time since the evening had begun, applause slowly rose through the room. It was not the loud celebration prepared for an honored guest. It was quieter, steadier, and more sincere. People were no longer applauding wealth or influence. They were acknowledging a simple truth that had been standing among them all along. Beneath the glow of the crystal chandeliers, surrounded by elegant tables and carefully planned speeches, the most meaningful act of charity had not been written into the program. It had begun the moment someone chose to see the worth of another human being without asking what position they held, what entrance they used, or whether anyone else was watching. 1 year later, the same hotel welcomed guests beneath the same crystal chandeliers, yet the atmosphere felt unmistakably different. New signs greeted every visitor with the simple message that every entrance was an entrance of respect. Employees and guests arrived through the same front lobby, exchanging smiles instead of uncertain glances. The annual charity gala had become known not only for raising generous donations, but also for becoming an example of the values it claimed to support. Quiet changes had spread far beyond a single evening. Staff training now began with conversations about dignity before schedules, titles, or procedures. Supervisors were encouraged to learn the names of every employee. Small gestures of respect gradually became part of the culture rather than special exceptions. Many people who attended the previous gala returned with memories they had never expected to carry. They remembered the silence that had filled the ballroom more vividly than any speech. They remembered the moment appearances lost their importance. Most of all, they remembered the woman who had answered humiliation with grace instead of resentment. Naomi Carter walked through the front entrance without hesitation, wearing a tailored navy business suit instead of a service uniform. She no longer managed banquet tables or seating charts. After months of conversations with Vincent Castellano and the foundation's leadership, she had accepted a new position directing community outreach programs that created job training opportunities for people whose talents were often overlooked. She insisted that every participant be welcomed personally because she understood better than anyone how much a simple greeting could mean. Her office wall held no awards, only a framed note written in her mother's careful handwriting. Your character enters every room before your name does. Those words continued guiding every decision she made. Across the ballroom, Vincent watched quietly as volunteers greeted newcomers with warmth and genuine respect. He had funded many successful projects throughout his career, yet he privately considered one decision made beneath a fluorescent service light to be among the most meaningful choices of his life. Wealth could build impressive buildings, but character determined what happened inside them. When Naomi approached to thank him for attending, Vincent simply smiled. "You built this," he said. Naomi gently shook her head. "No," she replied. "People built this together once they decided to see one another." Their conversation ended there because neither believed important truths required long speeches. Nearby, the young hotel employee who had once apologized in the hallway now supervised an entire hospitality team. He welcomed every arriving guest with the same kindness Naomi had shown him a year before. The former security supervisor personally opened the front doors for every employee beginning their shift, understanding that respect was most meaningful when practiced consistently. As the evening continued, laughter filled the ballroom once again, but this time it carried warmth instead of judgment. The orchestra played, conversations flourished, and generosity flowed freely, yet the greatest success could not be measured by donation totals or headlines in tomorrow's newspapers. It lived quietly in every person who chose compassion over assumption and humility over appearance. Some stories ended with applause. Others ended with silence. This one ended with ordinary people treating one another with extraordinary respect. And on that night, everyone remembered what true dignity looked like.